Hi everyone, my name is Renan Guaresi and I'm here today to present a work I've done with some colleagues and professors both from my home university in Brazil, UFRGS, and from FH Sankt Pölten in Austria. This work is called Empathy and the Phantom Limb Sensation, a multisensory experience for the embodiment of amputation. So the context in which this work first came to be was the 3D UI contest at the IEEE VR conference, which happened in March. The main theme of the contest was embodiment for the difference, and the challenge was to build a VR experience that would enable people to feel the difficulties that people with disabilities felt in their everyday lives, as to promote empathy. There, the application entries would be judged for their novelty, the empathy they provoked, and their aesthetics. To participate in this context, we could pick any different human conditions. So in our case, we developed a small brainstorm session, came up with some ideas, and decided on the phantom limb sensation, or PLS. So PLS is a condition that is commonly suffered by people who have had any limbs amputated from their bodies. What they usually feel is being touched, itchiness, or even pain in a part of the limb they no longer have. Reportedly, this is felt by about 80% of amputees, and it usually lasts for about 2 years after the amputation happens. In our research, we found several studies that try to use VR to lessen the effects of PLS by replacing the amputated limb with a simulated virtual limb, gradually letting their brains feel accustomed to the lack of a member there. These studies proved to be very effective on the pain relief for these people. In our case, we're trying to accomplish the opposite of this, getting people with intact limbs to go through the same experience, the experience of having had a limb amputated. Our intention is to promote empathy for these people through embodiment, which in this case can be summarized as changing the user's own virtual representation in VR. To accomplish this change, we developed a multisensory simulation experience where more than one of the user's senses are played with, as to enhance their sense of presence inside our VR environment. So to get to this experience, we decided to use VR to transport the user's sight and hearing into our virtual world, as well as both passive and active haptics to simulate their virtual touching experience. To get there, the Vive head-mounted display was used as a visual portal. Attached to it is a lip motion hand tracker, which gets the position for each of the user's real hands into our application, as well as their fingers. Finally, we use the Exos wrist, which is a haptic device that applies different levels of force to 2 axes of the user's hand. For our particular setting, the simulated amputation occurred in the forearm, near the elbow. So our Exos device was placed along the user's arm, with its rotation axis set in the elbow instead of the wrist, as it is usually meant for. The environment the user is able to see is a virtual table set in front of him, divided in two by a small obstacle in the middle. In reality, only the left half of this table exists, also with real tangible objects on top of it, matching the virtual ones. On the other hand, figuratively and literally, the right half of the table is purely virtual, as well as the objects on top of it. This was made to allow the user's non-existent virtual hand to go through the table, simulating that the arm they do have doesn't exist. Haptic feedback is provided on the tip of the elbow to simulate the existent part of the virtual arm touching the side of the table, as well as the virtual objects. I'm replicating this image here from a previous slide to help illustrate the scenario. The left hand will be able to feel everything it touches due to passive haptics of the real objects. The right hand won't feel anything except for the user's proprioception, which is actually felt by PLS patients. This confusion between feeling things in a non-existent limb will be maintained. To let users test out our experience, we developed two simple tasks. Both with the right and left hands, one at a time, users were asked to move objects on top of the table to colored targets. On the left-hand side, they are able to simply grab the objects and place them there, with all tactile feelings being intact. On the right-hand side, however, if a user tries to grab an object, their hand would just go through them. Just like an amputee, they need to get used to using the rest of their limb to push the objects around until they reach the targets. Again, the tactile feeling of the objects and the table here are being emulated by the haptic device in their arms, since the objects are only virtual. I'm going to play a video now demonstrating our working prototype. As to assess the validity of this experience, we intended on applying a self-presence questionnaire after each trial of our demo at the VR conference. However, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the event was moved to a purely online instance, and the demonstration happened only via video, so the tests couldn't be done as planned. Anyway, our proposed questionnaire had simple questions answerable in a 5-point Likert scale, regarding how much users agreed with each statement, and the results would demonstrate how much people felt as part of the simulation. In the next steps, we still need to apply these tests to a number of actual users before expanding the project, as to understand the effects of this type of simulation on people. Based on the feedback of people, we'll be able to work more on the implementation and maybe replace any piece of hardware according to necessity, as to reach a more realistic simulation. Given that the application reaches good usability and embodiment levels, a more complex set of user tests and assessment will be developed as to proceed with the project, which will most likely require working alongside experts to put it in the right direction. In conclusion, this work was a proposal to figure out whether and how VR and haptics can be helpful in the context of promoting empathy via embodiment. Thanks everyone for your attention.